Welcome, weary watchers, to the gentle realm where Hawkins's final mysteries unfold like whispered bedtime prophecies. Tonight, we journey through the quiet corridors of possibility, exploring the predictions and dreams that fans have woven around Volume 2's approaching darkness. From Will's newfound powers to the hearts that beat in synchrony across dimensions, we'll trace the delicate threads of speculation that connect what we know to what we hope might be. So settle into your most comfortable sanctuary. Let the soft glow of anticipation wash over you, and allow these gentle theories to carry you into peaceful slumber as we dream together of how our beloved story might find its end. The moment that would forever change Will Byers' understanding of his place in the cosmic struggle between light and darkness began not with fanfare or dramatic revelation, but with the quiet aftermath of power unleashed in desperation. His small frame trembling on the concrete floor of what had once been a military facility, where secrets had been buried beneath layers of bureaucratic denial and institutional cruelty that stretched back decades to the earliest experiments that had created the very monsters they now faced. The fire that danced around Will's motionless form cast shadows that seemed to move with purpose beyond the simple physics of flame and fuel, each flicker revealing glimpses of the extraordinary transformation that had occurred when a gentle boy who preferred art to athletics had been forced to reach into reserves of strength that existed at the intersection of trauma and transcendence. His connection to the upside down finally manifesting as something other than vulnerability or victimhood, but as power that could be wielded in defense of those he loved most dearly. Joyce approached her son with the careful steps of someone who had learned through bitter experience that miraculous moments could transform into tragedies with the speed of a mother's heartbeat, her eyes drinking in the evidence of Will's incredible display, while her mind struggled to process the implications of abilities that connected him to forces she had spent years trying to protect him from. Her maternal instincts warring between pride in his courage and terror at what his newfound powers might cost him in the battles yet to come. The bodies of the creatures that had threatened their escape lay scattered around Will like fallen leaves after an autumn storm, their twisted forms testament to the reality that her younger son possessed capabilities that defied everything she thought she understood about the gentle artist who had always seemed too sensitive for a world that rewarded aggression, over empathy, too fragile for conflicts that demanded violence as the price of survival, too pure for the kind of moral compromises that adult life inevitably required from people who wanted to protect their families from harm. Mike Wheeler's reaction to witnessing Will's extraordinary demonstration of power unfolded with the enthusiasm of someone whose love had always recognized the heroic potential that existed beneath his best friend's quiet exterior, his voice rising with excitement as he began to catalogue the incredible things Will had just accomplished, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to express admiration that had been building for years, but had never found adequate outlet until this moment when supernatural abilities provided vocabulary for feelings that had previously existed beyond the reach of language. The rambling praise that poured from Mike's lips carried undertones of worship that went far beyond simple friendship into territory that Joyce recognized from her own memories of young love, discovering itself through admiration that transcended ordinary affection, his complete absorption in celebrating Will's heroism, revealing depths of devotion that might have remained hidden if circumstances had not created opportunities for such unguarded emotional expression to emerge naturally from crisis, situations that stripped away the careful social performance that teenage boys typically maintain to protect themselves from vulnerability. Joyce's gentle interruption of Mike's enthusiastic monologue reflected her understanding that intense moments required space for processing and recovery rather than immediate analysis or celebration. Her maternal wisdom, recognizing that Will needed time to absorb what had happened to him before being asked to consider its implications for their ongoing struggle against forces that had already claimed too much from their small family unit, her protective instincts extending to shield him from pressure to be more than human, even when his abilities suggested possibilities that stretched beyond normal limitations. The direction that all three turned their attention toward revealed something moving through the ruins of the facility that had been their prison. The lighting of the scene suggesting either dawn breaking over their escape or the supernatural glow that accompanied interdimensional phenomena, their shared focus creating a moment of unity that transcended the individual concerns each carried about what Will's transformation might mean for his safety and their chances of surviving the larger conflict that his powers had now made him central to, rather than simply victim of. The decision to proceed directly to the radio station reflected their understanding that time remained their enemy, despite Will's successful demonstration of abilities that could turn the tide of their struggle. The walkie-talkie communications with Robin and Lucas, confirming that their friends had witnessed evidence of power being unleashed, but needed context to understand what they had experienced and how it connected to the larger plan. That required coordination between multiple groups operating in different locations throughout Hawkins. Lucas's choice to change into his blue sweatshirt, while the others remained in clothing that bore evidence of their recent trauma, suggested his practical understanding that appearances mattered when presenting themselves to community members who might question their authority or competence. His attention to such details demonstrating maturity that had developed through previous supernatural crises that had taught him how civilian cooperation often depended upon projecting confidence and normalcy even when circumstances were anything but ordinary. The radio station that became their temporary headquarters offered the technological resources necessary for the complex plan that Robin had devised to address multiple threats simultaneously. Her understanding of media manipulation and public communication providing strategic advantages that complemented Will's newfound abilities while creating opportunities for misdirection that could protect Eleven from government forces that continued to pursue her despite evidence that she represented their best hope for defeating enemies that conventional military approaches could never overcome through traditional tactics. The double meaning embedded in the episode title Shock Jock revealed itself through both Robin's intention to broadcast controversial content that would shift government attention away from their supernatural mission, the literal shocking of a Demogorgon corpse that they hoped to resurrect as an ally in their fight against Vecna's army, the ambitious plan reflecting Mike's strategic thinking about turning enemies' resources against them while utilizing Will's connection to the hive mind in ways that had never been attempted but offered possibilities for evening odds that currently favored the forces of darkness. The wooden sticks and rope that Lucas, Robin, and Will arranged around the Demogorgon's still form created a makeshift apparatus for the dangerous experiment they were about to attempt, their improvised equipment reflecting the reality that world-saving often required creativity and resourcefulness rather than sophisticated technology. The scene evoking images of young people throughout history who had been forced to become inventors and warriors simultaneously when adult institutions failed to protect them from threats that required both courage and ingenuity to defeat. Robin's manipulation of voltage levels to create the electrical shock that might restart the Demogorgon's heart demonstrated her scientific knowledge and technical skills, while also representing the group's willingness to take extraordinary risks in pursuit of solutions that conventional approaches could never achieve. Her steady hands and focused concentration providing anchor point of competence and reliability that allowed the others to trust in plans that would have seemed impossible if proposed by anyone less capable or committed to their collective survival. The moment when Will's eyes turned white as he attempted to harness his connection to Vecna's hive mind in order to control the resurrected Demogorgon represented the culmination of character development that had begun with his first disappearance into the Upside Down, his evolution from victim to potential savior, requiring him to embrace the very connection that had once made him vulnerable, his courage in facing powers that had traumatized him, reflecting growth that could only have occurred through the support and love of friends who had never stopped believing in his worth and potential. Mike and Robin's positioning near Will during his attempt to control the Demogorgon created visual representation of the support network that had sustained him through years of supernatural trauma, their presence offering both practical assistance if something went wrong and emotional anchor that reminded him he was not alone in facing forces that had previously isolated him from normal teenage life, their friendship providing foundation of strength that made heroic acts possible rather than simply necessary. The realization that Vecna had become aware of Will's abilities and was preparing to counterattack through their shared connection introduced element of danger that transformed their ambitious plan from calculated risk into desperate gambole. The psychological warfare that ensued representing battle for Will's identity and autonomy that had implications far beyond the immediate tactical situation, his resistance to manipulation requiring forms of internal strength that years of therapy and family support had helped him develop, but that now faced ultimate test. Will's struggle to breathe as Vecna attempted to use their connection against him paralleled Eleven's experiences with supernatural possession, while also representing unique challenges that arose from his particular relationship. To the Upside Down, the physical symptoms of psychological attack, demonstrating how completely the boundaries between mental and physical reality had been dissolved by forces that operated beyond normal human understanding, his body becoming battlefield where larger cosmic conflict played out in intensely personal terms. Mike's instinctive movement to protect Will from Vecna's influence, potentially pushing Robin aside to claim exclusive right to comfort and support his best friend, would have created parallel to their Season 2 experience, while also revealing the depth of possessive concern that characterized Mike's feelings for Will, his territorial behavior in crisis situations, suggesting emotions that transcended normal friendship boundaries, even when he remained unable to articulate or fully acknowledge what his protective instincts actually represented in terms of romantic attachment. The internal battle that Will fought against Vecna's attempts to weaponize his love for Mike and his growing understanding of his own sexuality demonstrated the villain's sophisticated approach to psychological manipulation. His strategy of using authentic emotions as sources of shame and weakness, revealing deep understanding of how social prejudices could be transformed into weapons against vulnerable young people who had not yet found strength to embrace their authentic identities without fear of rejection or persecution. Will's resistance to having his feelings for Mike used against him represented a crucial moment in his character development. His refusal to allow love to become source of weakness rather than strength, marking transition from victim mentality to heroic identity. His understanding that authentic emotion could not be corrupted by those who sought to exploit it for evil purposes, providing foundation for confidence that would sustain him through future challenges that required both supernatural abilities and emotional courage. The visions that Vecna forced Will to witness, Holly trapped with vines down her throat, Max imprisoned in psychological limbo, other victims whose suffering mirrored his own past trauma, represented attempt to overwhelm him with responsibility for pain he could not prevent and guilt for survival when others had not been as fortunate. The emotional manipulation targeting his empathetic nature and tendency towards self-blame in ways that had previously made him vulnerable to depression and isolation. Will's empathy for Holly's situation, enhanced by his personal experience with similar violation and trauma, created emotional leverage that Vecna attempted to exploit, while also providing motivation for Will to fight harder against the force that threatened to claim another innocent child. His identification with her suffering transforming potential weakness into source of strength that fueled his determination to break free from psychological control and protect others from experiencing what he had endured. The revelation about Max's continued imprisonment in Vecna's psychological realm provided new information that changed the tactical situation, while also creating additional emotional pressure for Will to succeed in his resistance. His understanding that failure might doom her to permanent captivity, adding stakes that went beyond his own survival to encompass responsibility for saving someone whose fate had become entangled with his own supernatural connection. Vecna's ability to harness Will's powers, in the same way that Will could access the hive mind, represented the bidirectional nature of their connection. The revelation that influence could flow in both directions, creating terrifying possibilities, while also suggesting strategies that might be employed against the villain. The understanding that power could be turned against its source, providing hope for ultimate victory, even in moments when immediate prospects seemed darkest. The desperate shout of "run" that Will managed to force through Vecna's control represented triumph of love over manipulation. His concern for Mike's safety, providing sufficient motivation to break through psychological domination temporarily. His ability to fight back to consciousness, long enough to warn the person he cared about most, demonstrating that authentic emotion remained stronger than artificial control when tested by circumstances that demanded ultimate sacrifice for the sake of protecting others. Mike's reluctance to abandon Will during his moment of greatest vulnerability reflected the depth of connection that had sustained their friendship through supernatural crises and normal teenage complications alike. His instinctive understanding that leaving Will alone with dangerous forces would represent betrayal of everything their relationship had meant to both of them, his torn loyalties between self-preservation and devotion, creating internal conflict that could only be resolved through Will's own insistence that love sometimes required painful choices. The collapse that finally overcame Will after his heroic struggle against Vecna's control represented both physical exhaustion from supernatural exertion and psychological toll of resisting forces that sought to corrupt everything he valued most. His unconsciousness providing merciful relief from battle that had required him to fight simultaneously on multiple fronts while maintaining awareness that failure could doom not only himself but everyone he cared about to fates worse than simple death. The image of Will lying motionless on the radio station's sofa, while Joyce knelt beside him in attitudes of prayer and desperate hope, created tableau of maternal love, confronting supernatural forces that threatened to claim her child, her vigil representing countless hours of worry and protection that had characterized her relationship with both her sons throughout years, marked by extraordinary challenges that had tested every aspect of their family bonds. Mike's entrance into the room where Will lay unconscious, his face reflecting the kind of lost hope that came from watching someone precious suffer beyond his ability to help or heal, created opportunity for conversation between two people whose love for Will provided common ground. Despite the different nature of their relationships with him, their shared concern transcending generational boundaries to create understanding that might not have been possible under normal circumstances. The conversation that Joyce and Mike would share about Will's condition and their fears for his future promised to reveal depths of emotion that both had struggled to express directly to Will himself. Their ability to speak honestly about their love and concern, while he remained unconscious, providing safe space for admissions that might have been too vulnerable or intense for normal social interaction. Their mutual recognition of Will's exceptional qualities creating bond between them that honored his impact on their lives. Joyce's potential acknowledgement of the changing dynamics in Mike and Will's friendship, her maternal intuition, recognizing signs of emotional evolution that might not have been apparent to the boys themselves, could create opportunity for generational wisdom to support young love that was still finding courage to acknowledge itself. Her acceptance and encouragement, providing foundation that might give Mike permission to explore feelings he had not yet learned to name or trust. The guilt that Mike would experience upon reflection about his treatment of Will during their time in California, his growing awareness that distance and confusion about his own emotions had caused pain to someone who deserved only kindness and support, would demonstrate character growth that came from recognizing how fear of authentic feeling could damage relationships that meant more than social conventions or personal comfort. His remorse creating motivation for future behavior that honored rather than denied the depth of his connection to Will. The laboratory that had served as prison for Eleven, Hopper, and Joyce existed in that liminal space between dimensions where the familiar architecture of Hawkins National Laboratory had been transformed by the Upside Down's corrupting influence into something that retained the sterile corridors and clinical equipment of the original facility, while also bearing the organic decay and pulsing darkness that characterized Vecna's domain, its walls breathing with malevolent life that seemed to mock the scientific precision that had once defined Dr. Brenner's systematic approach to exploiting children whose only crime had been possessing abilities that made them valuable to people who measured human worth in terms of strategic advantage, rather than inherent dignity deserving protection. The explosion that shattered their prison walls carried the force of Hopper's military training combined with his desperate father's love for a daughter who had suffered enough at the hands of institutions that claimed to serve the greater good while actually serving the narrow interests of men who had never learned to see children as anything more than resources to be harvested or weapons to be forged through trauma that broke spirits, while supposedly strengthening supernatural abilities that could be directed toward purposes that their young possessors would never have chosen if given genuine freedom to decide their own fates. Hopper's grenade vest, which had been intended as instrument of ultimate sacrifice if escape proved impossible, instead became tool of liberation that cleared pathways through walls that had been designed to contain people whose powers made them dangerous to captors who understood control but not love, who grasped manipulation but not trust, who recognized useful abilities but remained blind to the human souls that housed those capabilities, and deserved respect rather than exploitation, regardless of how valuable their gifts might prove to military planners and government officials. The guards, who had enforced the laboratory's cruel routines of experimentation and punishment, fell before the righteous fury of parents whose children had been stolen from them through legal documents that bore official seals, but lacked moral authority, their weapons and training proving inadequate against the primal force of protective instincts that had been awakened by years of separation and worry that had transformed ordinary adults into warriors capable of extraordinary feats when fighting for the welfare of young people whose safety meant more than personal survival or social approval. Eleven's psychic abilities, no longer constrained by the sensory deprivation tanks and clinical environments that had been designed to channel her powers toward objectives chosen by others, flowed freely in service of escape and reunion rather than espionage and assassination, her telekinetic force becoming instrument of justice rather than tool of oppression. As she cleared obstacles and eliminated threats that stood between her found family and the freedom they had fought so long to achieve through courage that transcended normal human limitations, Joyce's maternal determination, which had sustained her through years of supernatural crises and bureaucratic obstruction, found new expression as she helped coordinate their escape while maintaining protective watch over Eleven's emotional state throughout the violence that was necessary for their liberation. But that might have triggered traumatic memories of previous battles where her powers had been used for purposes that violated her naturally gentle spirit, her presence providing anchor of love and acceptance that reminded the young woman that her worth extended far beyond her supernatural capabilities. The moment when they finally breached the barrier between the upside-down laboratory and the normal world represented more than simple geographical transition from one location to another. It marked their emergence from nightmare realm, where children were transformed into weapons, back into reality where families could be rebuilt and trauma could be healed through patient love rather than exploited for strategic advantage. Their return to familiar Hawkins terrain, providing visual confirmation that escape was possible even from situations that seemed designed to be inescapable. The reunion that followed their return to the surface world carried emotional weight that no amount of time or distance could diminish. Hopper's embrace of 11 reflecting years of separation, during which he had never stopped believing in her strength, while also never forgetting his responsibility to protect her from those who would harm her, his tears falling without shame as he held the daughter whose absence had created void in his life that no amount of alcohol or professional dedication could adequately fill. Joyce's joy at seeing Will safe despite the exhaustion and confusion that marked his features reflected maternal love that had never wavered, even when supernatural forces had stolen her son into dimensions where normal parental protection could not reach, her hands reaching out to touch his face as if to confirm through physical sensation that he was truly present and no longer trapped in realms where she could not follow or defend him from dangers that exceeded her comprehension. The strategic regrouping that began immediately after their emotional reunions reflected the group's understanding that their escape represented only temporary victory in larger conflict that would require all their combined strengths and abilities to resolve permanently. Their movement toward familiar locations like Hopper's cabin, providing both practical advantages in terms of defensible positions and psychological comfort that came from being surrounded by spaces that held memories of happier times when their problems had seemed manageable. Hopper's cabin, with its rustic furniture and simple comforts, became sanctuary where planning could occur without the pressure of immediate danger. Its isolation, providing security that allowed for honest conversation about fears and hopes, while its familiar atmosphere reminded everyone present that normal life remained possible if they could successfully defeat the forces that threatened everything they valued most about their community and relationships. The sensory deprivation tank that had been transported to provide 11 with enhanced psychic capabilities when needed served dual purpose as both tactical resource and symbol of her evolution from victim to hero. Her willingness to enter the device voluntarily for purposes she had chosen, rather than being commanded to pursue, representing triumph of personal agency over institutional control. Her maturation into young woman who could make informed decisions about how her abilities would be used, demonstrating healing that had occurred through love rather than manipulation. 11's search for the missing party members who remained trapped in the Upside Down required her to project her consciousness across dimensional boundaries while maintaining awareness of her physical body's vulnerability, her psychic exploration, revealing both her growing mastery of abilities that had once frightened her and her deepening understanding of how her powers could serve protective rather than destructive purposes when guided by love rather than fear or anger. The tender conversations that occurred between separated friends as they worked to coordinate rescue efforts across dimensional barriers reflected bonds that had been forged through shared trauma but strengthened through mutual support and understanding. Their ability to maintain emotional connection despite physical separation, demonstrating resilience that supernatural forces could challenge but never completely destroy when nurtured through genuine care and commitment to each other's welfare. Will and Joyce's heart-to-heart conversation about his guilt over Vecna's ability to use their connection against him revealed the psychological complexity of surviving supernatural trauma that created ongoing vulnerability even after immediate physical danger had passed. His fear that he would always be susceptible to manipulation by forces he could not control, reflecting legitimate concerns that required acknowledgement rather than dismissal if healing was to occur through honest confrontation with difficult truths. Joyce's maternal wisdom in addressing Will's fears combined validation of his concerns with gentle reassurance that his worth was not defined by his vulnerability to supernatural influence. Her understanding that guilt and shame could become prisons more effective than any physical containment, helping her provide the kind of support that acknowledged his suffering, while also affirming his strength and value as person whose experiences had created empathy and courage rather than simply weakness or damaged that would define him permanently. The conversation between Mike and Eleven by the sensory deprivation tank carried weight of relationship that had evolved beyond simple romantic attraction into something more complex and mature. Their ability to discuss difficult topics without anger or recrimination, reflecting growth that had occurred through their shared experiences with supernatural crisis and personal challenge that had taught them both about different forms of love and commitment. Eleven's recognition that their relationship had changed during their months of separation, her honest acknowledgement that they had both grown in directions that might not be compatible with romantic partnership but that enhanced their capacity for other forms of deep connection, demonstrated emotional intelligence that had developed through her exposure to normal social relationships and her growing understanding of her own needs and desires beyond what others expected or demanded from her. Mike's acceptance of Eleven's perspective, his relief at being released from expectations that he had struggled to meet authentically, revealed his own maturation into a young man who could value honesty over convenience and genuine connection over social approval. His gratitude for her understanding, creating foundation for friendship that might prove more durable and satisfying than romantic relationship that required both parties to pretend feelings they no longer authentically experienced. The lighting that bathed both conversations in similar golden tones suggested dawn of new understanding and possibility. The shared illumination creating visual parallel between Will's emergence from guilt and shame into acceptance of his complexity, and Mike's emergence from confused romantic obligation into clarity about his authentic feelings and désir, both young men finding freedom through honest confrontation with truths they had previously been afraid to acknowledge. The preparations for larger battle that began as soon as immediate emotional needs had been addressed reflected the group's understanding that personal healing and tactical success were not separate objectives, but interconnected aspects of same struggle. Their ability to support each other through individual challenges creating strength that would be essential when facing enemies that sought to divide them through fear and manipulation, rather than defeat them through direct confrontation. The sensory deprivation tank's hum as 11 prepared to search for their missing friends provided soundtrack for planning sessions that combined practical strategy with emotional support. The familiar sound that had once represented imprisonment and exploitation, now serving as tool of liberation and protection, its transformation from symbol of trauma into instrument of heroism, reflecting broader themes of reclaiming power from those who had abused it. The maps and photographs that covered every surface of the cabin created visual representation of their expanding understanding of Hawkins' supernatural geography. The documentation of portals and safe houses and enemy strongholds, demonstrating methodical approach to warfare that combined supernatural abilities with conventional intelligence gathering, their preparation, reflecting hard-won wisdom about importance of understanding terrain, both physical and psychological, when fighting battles that occurred simultaneously in multiple dimensions. The weapons that Hopper cleaned and organized, while others planned psychic strategies, represented practical acknowledgement that supernatural conflicts often required conventional force as complement to extraordinary abilities. His military experience providing crucial perspective on logistics and tactics that enhanced rather than competed with the unique capabilities that younger members of their group contributed to collective effort. The food that Joyce prepared while monitoring everyone's emotional state served multiple purposes beyond simple nutrition. Her attention to comfort and care, creating atmosphere of home and safety that reminded everyone present why they were fighting and what they hoped to preserve through victory. Her domestic wisdom, understanding that physical needs and emotional needs were interconnected aspects of human well-being, that both required attention if people were to perform at their highest levels. The photographs of happier times that decorated the cabin's walls provided visual reminders of what normal life could offer when supernatural threats were defeated. The images of birthday parties and fishing trips and quiet family moments creating goals that transcended simple survival to encompass genuine happiness and peace that made extraordinary sacrifices seem worthwhile rather than simply necessary. The plans that emerged from their discussions reflected synthesis of supernatural abilities and human wisdom, tactical innovation and emotional intelligence, individual strengths and collective commitment that transformed them from collection of separate people into unified force, capable of confronting enemies that had previously seemed invincible, their unity creating power that exceeded some of their individual capabilities. The mission to rescue Nancy, Jonathan, Steve, and Dustin from the Upside Down's labyrinthine depths required forms of courage that went beyond simple physical bravery into territory where dimensional barriers could crush spirits as easily as bodies, where the familiar laws of physics gave way to nightmare logic that transformed every shadow into potential threat and every moment of silence into prelude to horror that had been stalking their small town since the first portal had been torn through reality's fabric by government experiments that treated children as laboratory specimens rather than human beings deserving protection and care. Mike's first journey into the Upside Down carried significance that transcended tactical necessity to encompass personal milestone in his evolution from protected child to active participant in supernatural warfare. His crossing of the threshold between normal Hawkins and its dark reflection marking transition into understanding that some battles could not be fought from safe distance, but required willingness to enter enemy territory where conventional advantages meant nothing and survival depended upon qualities that suburban upbringing had never been designed to develop or test under conditions where failure meant more than embarrassment or disappointment. The portal that served as gateway between dimensions shimmered with energy that seemed to whisper promises of power and knowledge while simultaneously radiating menace that made clear such gifts came with prices that sane people would never willingly pay. Its unstable edges crackling with forces that existed beyond human comprehension, yet responded to human will when channeled through abilities that blurred boundaries between science and magic, between natural law and supernatural intervention that defied every assumption about reality's fundamental structure and consistency. Robin's presence beside Mike as they descended into darkness provided companionship that transcended their different personalities and backgrounds to create partnership based on shared commitment to protecting people they loved. Her quick wit and scientific curiosity serving as complement to his strategic thinking and protective instincts in ways that demonstrated how diverse talents could combine effectively when united by common purpose that elevated individual capabilities beyond what any single person could achieve. Alone, the air in the Upside Down carried taste of decay and electricity that coated their throats with each breath, while filling their lungs with atmosphere that seemed designed to remind intruders that they were unwelcome visitors in realm where different rules applied and where normal human physiology struggled to function efficiently, the environmental hostility serving as constant reminder that their mission operated under time, constraints imposed by their body's limitations, as well as tactical considerations about enemy response to their presence. Eleven's wetsuit, visible in glimpses as she moved through the twisted landscape ahead of them, represented her recent emergence from the interdimensional laboratory where she had been imprisoned, her ability to navigate the Upside Down's treacherous terrain, with confidence born from supernatural abilities and hard-won experience, providing leadership that guided their small rescue party toward objectives that required precision timing and flawless execution if they hoped to extract their friends before Vecna's forces could mount effective counterattack. The laboratory at the heart of the Upside Down's geography revealed itself as Nexus Point, where multiple dimensional threads converged, its central location within Vecna's domain, making it both strategic objective and obvious trap, where their enemies would expect rescue attempts to focus. The facility's importance to ongoing supernatural conflict evident in the layers of protection that surrounded it, and the constant activity of creatures that served as guards and sentries for secrets that could determine outcome of war between human freedom and monstrous domination. The decision to split into pairs reflected tactical wisdom about dividing risk while maximizing coverage of area that needed to be searched. The partnerships that formed demonstrating how crisis situations could reveal compatibility between people whose normal social interactions might never have suggested such natural collaboration, their ability to work together effectively under pressure, creating bonds that transcended surface differences to encompass deeper understanding of character and capability. Nancy and Jonathan's pairing carried emotional weight that extended beyond simple tactical convenience into territory where personal relationship needed healing, that crisis situations often catalyzed through shared danger that stripped away superficial concerns to reveal fundamental compatibility or incompatibility between people whose futures might be shaped by decisions made under extreme pressure, their collaboration providing opportunity for honest communication that normal circumstances had made difficult or impossible. The investigation that Nancy and Jonathan undertook together through the laboratory's twisted corridors required them to navigate both physical obstacles and emotional barriers that had developed during months of separation and miscommunication. Their professional partnership as they documented evidence and searched for clues, creating context where personal issues could be addressed without the artificial pressure of formal relationship discussions that might have forced premature resolutions to complex problems. Steve and Dustin's partnership reflected friendship that had survived multiple supernatural crises while evolving from unlikely mentorship into genuine brotherhood based on mutual respect and affection that transcended age differences and social boundaries. Their collaborative investigation of the laboratory's darker regions, providing opportunity for conversation that could address recent tensions while reinforcing bonds that had been tested but not broken by misunderstandings and changed circumstances. The tears that appeared in the upside-down ceiling created visual spectacle that defied explanation while suggesting fundamental instability in Vecna's control over his domain. The rips in fabric of alternate reality, revealing glimpses of normal sky that provided hope, while also creating tactical opportunities that might be exploited if they could understand the forces responsible for such dramatic alterations to environment that had previously seemed immutably hostile to human presence. The mysterious nature of the ceiling damage left them with questions that required investigation despite time pressures and safety concerns. Their scientific curiosity about supernatural phenomena competing with practical need to locate and extract their missing friends before enemy forces could respond effectively to intrusion that had already lasted longer than original plans had anticipated. Their balancing of intellectual interest with tactical necessity, demonstrating maturity that crisis situations often accelerated in young people. Nancy's relationship with Jonathan during their exploration of the laboratory's research areas revealed how shared purpose could create intimacy that transcended romantic categories to encompass partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. Their collaboration on documenting evidence and analyzing clues, demonstrating compatibility that existed independently of their complicated romantic history. Their ability to work together effectively, suggesting possibilities for future relationship that honored both their individual growth and their connection. The conversation that gradually developed between Nancy and Jonathan as they moved through abandoned offices and research stations provided opportunity for addressing misunderstandings that had accumulated during months of separation and different life experiences. Their honest discussion of fears and hopes occurring naturally within context of shared mission that required trust and cooperation. Their emotional vulnerability made safe by practical necessity that focused attention on collective objectives rather than individual insecurities. Steve and Dustin's investigation of the laboratory's lower levels brought them into contact with evidence of experiments that had been conducted on children whose only crime had been possessing abilities that made them valuable to researchers who measured human worth in terms of strategic advantage rather than inherent dignity. Their discovery of documentation about numbered subjects and psychological conditioning, creating emotional impact that required processing through conversation that strengthened their friendship. The attack by Demobats that targeted Steve and Dustin during their exploration created crisis that triggered memories of Eddie's sacrifice and death. The flying creature's aggressive assault, serving as reminder of losses that had occurred during previous battles, while also providing opportunity for Steve to demonstrate protective instincts toward younger friend whose scientific curiosity sometimes led him into dangerous situations that required intervention by people with more combat experience. Dustin's scientific mind, even under attack, continued analyzing the Demobats' behavior patterns and tactical approaches. His ability to maintain intellectual curiosity despite physical danger, reflecting personality traits that had made him a valuable team member throughout their supernatural adventures. His observations about enemy capabilities providing information that could prove useful in future encounters, while also demonstrating how different people contributed different strengths to collective survival efforts. The embrace that Steve and Dustin shared after successfully defending themselves against the Demobat assault represented healing of relationship tensions that had developed during recent months. Their physical expression of mutual affection and relief, transcending masculine social conventions that might have prevented such emotional honesty under normal circumstances. Their hug serving as acknowledgement of brotherhood that had been tested but ultimately strengthened by shared danger and successful cooperation. The trauma that the Demobat attack triggered for Dustin, his memories of Eddie's heroic sacrifice flooding back with painful intensity during moments when similar creatures threatened his own safety, required Steve's emotional support and understanding. The older boy's maturity and experience with loss, providing foundation for comfort that acknowledged grief, while also affirming that survival carried obligations to honor fallen friends through continued courage and commitment to protecting others. Steve's evolution from popular teenager concerned primarily with social status into genuine hero, willing to risk personal safety for people he cared about, found expression in his protective response to Dustin's emotional needs. His ability to provide both physical defense against supernatural threats and psychological support during traumatic episodes, demonstrating character development that had occurred through repeated exposure to situations that revealed authentic personality beneath carefully constructed social facade. The decision not to attempt escape from the Upside Down during this initial rescue mission reflected tactical wisdom about avoiding unnecessary risks, while incomplete information about enemy positions and capabilities could lead to catastrophic mistakes. Their recognition that successful extraction required more preparation and coordination than their current resources could provide, demonstrating strategic thinking that prioritized long-term success over immediate gratification, or heroic gestures that might accomplish little while costing much. The documentation that Nancy collected during their investigation provided crucial intelligence about Vecna's operations and capabilities, while also creating permanent record of crimes that had been committed against innocent children. Her journalism training and natural attention to detail serving collective effort, while also satisfying personal need to bear witness to suffering that deserved acknowledgement rather than concealment or denial by institutions that preferred convenient ignorance to difficult truth. Jonathan's photographic skills complemented Nancy's written documentation to create comprehensive evidence package that could serve multiple purposes, from tactical planning to eventual legal accountability for those responsible for transforming children into weapons through systematic abuse disguised as scientific research. His artistic eye capturing details that might be overlooked by purely analytical approaches, while also creating visual record of horrors that words alone could not adequately convey. The laboratory equipment that surrounded them during their investigation represented intersection of legitimate scientific research and unethical experimentation. The familiar medical devices and monitoring systems that should have been used for healing, instead serving purposes that violated every principle of human dignity and medical ethics. Their presence in interdimensional facility, demonstrating how institutional authority could be corrupted when divorced from moral accountability and public oversight. The holding cells that they discovered during their exploration provided physical evidence of imprisonment and abuse that had been inflicted upon children whose supernatural abilities made them valuable to people who measured human worth in terms of strategic utility. rather than inherent rights. Deserving protection, the small rooms with their reinforcement and monitoring systems, creating visual testimony to systematic cruelty that required documentation for historical record and future prevention. The psychological profiles and experimental records that Nancy found among abandoned files revealed systematic approach to breaking children's spirits while enhancing their supernatural capabilities. The clinical language and detailed observations about emotional manipulation and behavioral conditioning, providing insight into methodical cruelty that transformed healing profession into instrument of torture, designed to create compliant weapons rather than healthy human beings. The evidence of resistance that Jonathan's photographs captured, scratches on walls, hidden messages, signs of attempted escape, demonstrated that even under extreme duress, children had maintained enough humanity and hoped to continue fighting against their captors, their small acts of defiance serving as testimony to resilience that institutional cruelty could suppress but never completely eliminate when human spirit refused to accept dehumanization as inevitable or permanent condition. The growing understanding of Vecna's true stronghold that emerged from their investigation revealed that the visible laboratory represented only surface layer of much more extensive operation that extended deep into interdimensional space. Their recognition that current mission could only achieve limited objectives, creating urgency about returning with more comprehensive plan that could address full scope of enemy capabilities and defensive positions. The time constraints that governed their exploration became increasingly pressing as evidence mounted about the scale and complexity of Vecna's domain, their understanding that extended presence in hostile territory increased risks of discovery and capture, while also providing diminishing returns in terms of actionable intelligence, creating pressure to conclude reconnaissance mission, while they still retained capability to extract safely and report findings to larger group. The coordination between their ground-level investigation and 11's psychic monitoring from outside the Upside Down created multi-layered approach to intelligence gathering that maximized information collection while minimizing risks to individual team members. Their ability to maintain communication across dimensional boundaries, demonstrating technological and supernatural capabilities that provided significant advantages over enemies who relied primarily on brute force and intimidation. The retreat that eventually became necessary as enemy patrols increased their activity around the laboratory area required careful timing and coordinated movement that tested their ability to work together under pressure while maintaining silence and avoiding detection by creatures whose supernatural senses could potentially locate intruders. Despite efforts at concealment, their successful withdrawal providing foundation for more extensive operations that could build upon intelligence they had gathered. The meaning embedded within the episode title, Escape from Camelot, revealed itself through layers of symbolism that connected Holly Wheeler's imprisonment within Vecna's psychological realm to broader themes of liberation from systems that demanded conformity at the expense of authentic identity, the legendary kingdom serving as metaphor for seemingly perfect worlds that concealed darkness beneath their shining surfaces, while trapping inhabitants within roles that served power structures rather than individual flourishing. Her journey toward freedom representing not merely physical escape, but psychological emancipation from forces that sought to define her worth through obedience, rather than celebrate her courage through resistance. Holly's brave infiltration of Vecna's memory palace required forms of heroism that adults might struggle to comprehend or appreciate. Her child's intuitive understanding of narrative logic and symbolic meaning providing advantages that analytical thinking could never match when navigating psychological landscapes where literal interpretation led to confusion, while imaginative flexibility opened pathways toward understanding and eventual liberation. Her natural fearlessness in the face of impossible situations, demonstrating qualities that institutional education often discouraged rather than cultivated. The Memory Palace itself existed as architectural impossibility, where corridors led to different decades and rooms contained entire lifetimes, compressed into spaces that defied physical laws while remaining psychologically coherent to consciousness that could accept dream logic as valid framework for understanding reality, its shifting geometries reflecting the unstable nature of traumatic memory, where chronology collapsed and emotional associations created connections that bypassed rational thought to address deeper truths about human experience and supernatural influence. Max's resilience during her prolonged mental captivity within Vecna's psychological prison demonstrated strength that transcended physical endurance to encompass spiritual fortitude that refused to accept despair as permanent condition, even when surrounded by evidence of hopelessness, designed to break will and destroy faith in possibility of rescue or redemption. Her determination to maintain identity despite systematic attempts at psychological erasure, providing inspiration that extended far beyond her immediate circumstances to encompass universal human capacity for resistance against dehumanizing forces. The partnership that developed between Holly and Max across the boundary between physical reality and psychological imprisonment created connection that transcended normal limitations of space and time to demonstrate how shared purpose could unite people whose experiences might otherwise seem incompatible, their collaboration proving that heroism could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people whose courage had never been tested under conditions where conventional wisdom provided inadequate guidance. Max's knowledge of Vecna's methods and psychological tactics, gained through months of imprisonment that had taught her to recognize patterns in his manipulation while maintaining core identity that remained untouchable despite constant assault, provided crucial intelligence that Holly could use to navigate dangers that might otherwise prove insurmountable for someone whose innocence had protected her from understanding how thoroughly evil could corrupt even spaces that should represent safety and comfort. Holly's fresh perspective on Vecna's domain, unburdened by the trauma and exhaustion that colored Max's perceptions, allowed her to see possibilities and opportunities that longer captivity might have obscured. Her child's ability to find wonder and potential for adventure, even in nightmare circumstances, providing emotional energy that could sustain both girls through challenges that required hope as much as strategy if they were to succeed in escaping forces designed to crush spirit along with body. The exploration of Henry Creel's past through his preserved memories provided both girls with understanding of how ordinary children could be transformed into monsters through systematic abuse and manipulation that exploited natural sensitivity while destroying empathy that might have provided resistance to corrupting influences. Their witness to his childhood trauma, creating context for comprehending how victims could become perpetrators without excusing choices that caused suffering for innocent people who deserved protection rather than predation. Patty's introduction through Henry's memories offered glimpse of first love that paralleled Mike and Will's developing relationship, while also demonstrating how authentic connection could provide anchor points of humanity that supernatural corruption sought to destroy through isolation and shame that prevented people from accessing emotional resources that might have sustained them through transformation from innocent children into weapons designed to serve purposes they would never have chosen if given genuine freedom to decide their own destinies. The parallel between Patty and Henry's relationship and Mike's growing understanding of his feelings for Will created thematic resonance that connected past and present, while suggesting that patterns of love and loss, acceptance and rejection could repeat across generations unless conscious choices were made to break cycles that transformed vulnerability into violence and sensitivity into strategic advantage, rather than celebrating difference as source of strength and beauty that enriched human experience. Henry's memories of theatrical performances and artistic collaboration with Patty revealed capacities for joy and creative expression that his later transformation into Vecna had systematically destroyed. The contrast between his youthful enthusiasm for storytelling and performance and his adult manipulation of reality for destructive purposes, demonstrating how trauma could corrupt gifts that should have brought happiness to their possessor and beauty to the world that surrounded them. The realization that Holly possessed powers that manifested through her connection to Vecna's hive mind represented discovery that imprisonment could sometimes provide access to abilities that would never have emerged under normal circumstances, her temporary psychic capabilities arising from supernatural contamination that created opportunities for heroic action, while also highlighting dangers inherent in any contact with forces that operated beyond human comprehension or moral constraint. Holly's ability to cast dimensional doors through her temporary psychic connection to Vecna's domain demonstrated how children's natural acceptance of impossible things could provide practical advantages when navigating supernatural challenges that defeated adult logic through their refusal to conform to conventional expectations about cause and effect. Her innocent faith in magic, creating literal, magical effects that more skeptical minds might have dismissed as impossible. The Dungeons & Dragons figure that Mike had given Holly, with its power to cast dimension door spells, transformed from simple toy into prophetic symbol that connected childhood games with supernatural realities. The connection between fantasy gaming and actual magical abilities, suggesting that imagination and play served purposes beyond entertainment, to include preparation for challenges that required creative thinking and willingness to attempt solutions that seemed impossible according to conventional wisdom. Will's unique position as the only person who had survived the Upside Down while having a vine down his throat, combined with his newly manifested powers, created template for understanding how Holly's similar experience might grant her temporary abilities that could be crucial for escape. His precedent, providing hope, while also highlighting dangers that such connection inevitably carried for children whose innocence made them vulnerable to corruption by forces that sought to exploit purity for malevolent purposes. The hive mind connection that Holly temporarily accessed through her supernatural contamination provided her with understanding of Vecna's domain that normal human consciousness could never achieve. Her ability to perceive the psychological architecture of his memory palace from inside a perspective, creating advantages that could be used against him, while also exposing her to influences that threatened to overwhelm young mind that had never been designed to process such complex and disturbing information. The doors that Holly learned to cast through Vecna's memories created pathways between different psychological spaces that existed within his mental domain. Her navigation of these passages requiring courage that combined childhood fearlessness with growing understanding of stakes involved in their escape attempt. Her successful manipulation of supernatural forces demonstrating potential that existed within all children when circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people. Max's journey through the dimensional door that connected the roundabout where Will had been discovered to her hospital room represented return voyage from psychological imprisonment to physical reality, the symbolic significance of her path leading from site of previous supernatural crisis to location where her body awaited reunion with consciousness that had been separated from flesh through Vecna's psychological manipulation, designed to harvest suffering while maintaining enough life to sustain ongoing torment. The hospital room that served as destination for Max's escape represented hope for healing and recovery that extended beyond simple reunion of mind and body to encompass broader possibilities for overcoming trauma and rebuilding life that had been interrupted by forces beyond her control, the medical equipment and professional care that surrounded her physical form, providing infrastructure for recovery that required both supernatural intervention and conventional treatment to achieve complete restoration. The music that would prove essential for Max's final liberation from Vecna's psychological control carried emotional resonance that transcended simple auditory stimulation to encompass memories of joy and connection that supernatural forces could suppress, but never completely eliminate. From human consciousness, the power of running up that hill, representing universal human capacity for finding strength through artistic expression that spoke to experiences of struggle and triumph. Lucas's protection of Max's vulnerable body during her psychological journey created physical anchor that complemented her spiritual resistance to Vecna's control, his devotion providing earthly foundation for supernatural battle that occurred simultaneously in multiple dimensions, his presence at her bedside demonstrating how love could transcend boundaries between conscious and unconscious, present and absent, hope and despair that supernatural forces sought to maintain through isolation and fear. The climactic escape sequence that paralleled Max's mental journey with her physical rescue from hospital dangers created cinematic opportunity for demonstrating how individual heroism and collective action could combine to achieve objectives that neither approach could accomplish. Independently, the interweaving of psychological and physical battles, highlighting connections between internal and external conflicts that characterized supernatural warfare, where victory required triumph over both material and spiritual enemies. Holly's solitary confrontation with Vecna in the Wheeler house after Max's escape represented ultimate test of courage that required her to face evil without supernatural allies or protective adult supervision. Her ability to recognize his true nature, despite his attempts at deception, providing psychological advantage that child's innocence and honesty could sometimes achieve more effectively than adult sophistication that might be vulnerable to manipulation through false appeals to reason or compromise. The Wheeler house that served as setting for Holly's final confrontation with Vecna carried symbolic weight as representation of domestic safety and family love that supernatural forces sought to corrupt or destroy. The familiar rooms and comfortable furniture providing backdrop for battle between innocence and corruption that would determine whether childhood wonder could survive contact with cosmic evil that sought to transform all beauty into sources of suffering and despair. Vecna's attempts to present himself as Mr. Waters, his false identity designed to appear harmless and trustworthy to children who had not yet learned to recognize sophisticated deception, represented his understanding that corruption often succeeded through gradual seduction rather than direct assault. His patient approach to manipulation, demonstrating strategic thinking that made him more dangerous than enemies who relied solely upon force or intimidation to achieve their objectives. The glitching effect that revealed Vecna's struggle to maintain his human disguise when confronted by someone who knew his true identity created visual representation of psychological pressure that truth could exert against deception. Holly's knowledge of his real nature serving as weapon that could disrupt his ability to present convincing false persona, her innocent honesty proving more powerful than adult sophistication that might have been vulnerable to his practiced manipulation. Holly's escape from Vecna's final attempt to recapture her represented triumph of authentic courage over supernatural coercion. Her ability to resist his influence despite being alone and afraid, demonstrating that heroism could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people. Her success providing hope that evil could be defeated through determination that refused to accept defeat as inevitable outcome. The stairs of the Wheeler house, where Vecna's glitching form attempted to pursue Holly, created symbolic representation of boundary between childhood innocence and adult corruption. His inability to cross that threshold while maintaining his deceptive appearance, suggesting that some forms of purity could not be violated without revealing the true nature of forces that sought to destroy them. Her escape representing preservation of hope in a world where darkness seemed to gain strength with each passing day. The resolution of Holly's escape provided foundation for understanding that individual acts of courage could create ripple effects that influenced larger conflicts. Her successful resistance to Vecna's control, weakening his psychological hold over other victims, while also providing tactical intelligence that could be used by adult allies who possessed resources and capabilities that children could not access independently. Her heroism, serving collective effort, while also validating her worth as person deserving respect and protection. The parallel fears that consumed Lucas Sinclair and Robin Buckley as they processed Will's vision of demogorgons descending upon Hawkins General Hospital created moment of shared terror that transcended their different personalities and backgrounds to reveal identical devotion to people whose safety meant more than their own survival. Their simultaneous recognition that Max and Vicky faced mortal danger, triggering protective instincts that had been forged through months of supernatural crisis and deepened through relationships that provided meaning beyond teenage, social hierarchies, or conventional expectations about appropriate emotional investment. Lucas's panic over Max's vulnerability, while her consciousness remained trapped in Vecna's psychological realm and her body lay defenseless in sterile hospital room, reflected love that had survived skepticism and grown stronger through adversity. His understanding that she faced dual threats from both supernatural forces seeking to claim her mind permanently and physical creatures that could destroy her flesh before her spirit had opportunity to return, creating urgency that bypassed rational thought to access primal determination that would not accept losing someone whose courage and authenticity had taught him about depths of feeling he had never previously imagined possible. Robin's equally intense concern for Vicky's safety provided Mike Wheeler with first direct evidence of romantic attachment that existed outside heterosexual assumptions. Her transparent worry about someone whose relationship to her remained officially undefined but emotionally essential, creating opportunity for observant young man whose own struggles with authentic identity had taught him to recognize signs of concealed affection that mirrored his internal experience with feelings that social conventions discouraged rather than celebrated or supported through community understanding and acceptance. The revelation of Robin and Vicky's relationship to Mike through crisis circumstances that stripped away careful social performance to reveal authentic emotional priorities carried significance that extended far beyond simple gossip or personal curiosity into territory where representation mattered profoundly for young people whose own sexual identity remained uncertain or undisclosed. Robin's visible love for another girl providing model of possibility that could inspire courage, while also demonstrating that happiness existed for people whose authentic selves differed from mainstream expectations. Mike's intelligence, sharpened through years of strategic thinking during supernatural crises and Dungeons & Dragons campaigns that required analysis of complex social dynamics and hidden motivations, enabled him to recognize patterns in Robin's behavior that less observant individuals might have dismissed as normal friendship concern. His growing understanding that she experienced romantic feelings for Vicky, creating foundation for later conversation that could address his own psychological struggles with identity and belonging. The behind-the-scenes footage of Robin driving frantically toward the hospital, her hands gripping the steering wheel with desperate intensity, while her face reflected terror that came from knowing that someone precious faced danger she could not immediately alleviate, provided visual evidence of love that transcended casual dating relationships to encompass commitment that demanded action, regardless of personal risk or social consequences that might result from public demonstration of feelings previously kept private. Lucas's race through hospital corridors toward Max's room required him to navigate obstacles that included both supernatural threats and institutional protocols designed to maintain order during crisis situations. His determination to reach her bedside, overriding concerns about rules or procedures that seemed insignificant compared to possibility of losing someone whose strength and independence had inspired his own growth from insecure middle schooler into confident young man capable of protecting people he cared about most deeply. The security guards who attempted to separate Robin from Vicky during the hospital crisis represented institutional failure to recognize authentic relationships that existed outside legal frameworks, their enforcement of visiting restrictions that ignored emotional bonds in favor of bureaucratic categories, demonstrating how systems designed to maintain order could become sources of additional suffering during emergencies that required flexibility and human understanding rather than rigid adherence to policies created for normal circumstances. Robin's position behind the security barrier, while Vicky faced supernatural danger alone, created visual representation of external forces that prevented people from protecting those they loved. The physical separation, serving as metaphor for social barriers that kept authentic relationships hidden, while forcing people to maintain facades that served others' comfort rather than their own emotional needs. Her visible frustration with inability to provide direct assistance, highlighting costs of concealment that extended beyond personal discomfort to encompass practical disadvantages during crisis situations. Vicky's confusion and fear during the Demodog attack reflected natural response of someone whose life experience had not included supernatural threats, but who possessed intelligence and resilience that enabled rapid adaptation to impossible circumstances. Her ability to remain functional despite terror and bewilderment, demonstrating character strength that had attracted Robin's attention and affection. Her questions about Robin's apparent foreknowledge of danger, creating opportunity for honesty that crisis situations often catalyzed between people whose relationships had been constrained by social expectations. The conversation between Robin and Vicky that occurred while they sought safety from supernatural predators provided context for addressing relationship dynamics that normal circumstances had made difficult to discuss openly. Vicky's anger about being excluded from important information competing with her gratitude for Robin's obvious concern for her welfare, their honest communication during life-threatening situation, creating intimacy that might have taken months to develop through conventional social interaction. Robin's desperate attempts to keep Vicky quiet during their concealment from Demogorgons reflected practical necessity that competed with emotional need to explain and apologize for deceptions that had been motivated by desire to protect rather than exclude. Her understanding that Vicky's tendency toward verbal processing could attract supernatural predators, creating tension between safety requirements and relationship maintenance that demanded immediate resolution through trust, cooperation. The reference to Will's earlier advice about kissing as solution to communication problems provided moment of levity that connected current crisis to previous romantic complications, while also highlighting how young people often possessed wisdom about emotional matters that adults overlooked or dismissed. The callback to his innocent suggestion, demonstrating how authentic relationships required courage to act on feelings, rather than simply analyzing them through endless conversation that could substitute for, but never replace, genuine connection. Lucas's efforts to transport Max to safety while carrying the radio that could provide access to her favorite music created poignant image of love, expressed through attention to details that might seem insignificant to casual observers, but that represented intimate knowledge of what brought joy and comfort to someone whose preferences and personality had been learned through patient observation and genuine care. His understanding that running up that hill held special significance for her recovery, demonstrating devotion that encompassed both grand gestures and small considerations. The elevator that Lucas and Max used to escape toward the hospital basement provided temporary refuge that also served as metaphor for descent into deeper understanding of what their relationship meant when tested by circumstances that demanded sacrifice and revealed character. Their physical journey downward, paralleling emotional movement toward recognition that their bond transcended teenage romance to encompass partnership that could sustain them through adult challenges that required mutual support, unwavering commitment. The basement level where Demogorgons had gathered created final battleground where love would be tested against supernatural hunger that sought to destroy everything beautiful and meaningful in human experience. The underground setting providing symbolic representation of psychological depths where authentic emotion resided beneath surface concerns about social acceptance or conventional success. Their confrontation with evil in hidden spaces, reflecting reality that most important battles occurred away from public recognition or institutional support. The scene of Lucas cradling Max while surrounded by Robin and Vicky represented triumph of human connection over supernatural isolation, their physical proximity during crisis demonstrating how shared danger could create bonds that transcended individual relationships to encompass community of care that protected all members through mutual support and recognition that everyone's safety depended upon collective courage and willingness to risk personal welfare for others' protection. The interweaving of Max and Holly's escape from Vecna's psychological prison with Lucas's protection of Max's physical form created cinematic parallel that demonstrated how battles occurred simultaneously on multiple levels of reality, the coordination between mental and material conflicts, highlighting connections between internal struggles for identity and external fights for survival, that characterized supernatural warfare, where victory required triumph over both spiritual and physical enemies. Max's infiltration of Vecna's memories alongside Holly provided opportunity for understanding enemy psychology while also accessing tactical information that could be used against him, their journey through his preserved experiences, revealing how childhood trauma had been transformed into weapon against innocence, their witness to his past, creating empathy that complicated simple categories of good and evil, while maintaining clear understanding that suffering did not justify perpetuating cycles of harm against people who deserved protection rather than predation. The discovery of Henry Creel's relationship with Patty through preserved memories offered template for understanding how first love could provide anchor points of humanity that supernatural corruption sought to destroy through isolation and manipulation. The parallel between past and present romantic relationships, suggesting patterns that could either repeat destructive cycles or break them through conscious choices to celebrate rather than suppress authentic emotional connection between people whose differences enriched rather than threatened. Community stability. Holly's casting of dimensional doors through her temporary psychic abilities demonstrated how children's natural acceptance of impossible things could provide practical advantages when navigating supernatural challenges. Her innocent faith in magic, creating literal magical effects that skeptical adult minds might have dismissed as wishful thinking. Her success proving that imagination and courage could combine to achieve objectives that conventional wisdom considered impossible. The roundabout where Will had been discovered, serving as starting point for Max's return journey, created symbolic connection between past supernatural crises and current resolution. The circular structure representing cycles of trauma and recovery that characterized Hawkins' relationship with interdimensional forces. Her path from that location to her hospital room tracing route from previous victim identity toward active participation in her own rescue and recovery. Max's desperate race through dimensional doors toward reunion with her physical body required forms of courage that combined spiritual determination with practical navigation skills. Her ability to maintain focus on goal of return while surrounded by psychological landscape designed to confuse and disorient, demonstrating strength that had been developed through months of imprisonment, but that retained essential humanity that Vecna's control could suppress but never completely eliminate from consciousness that refused to accept despair as permanent condition. The climactic moment when Max reached her hospital room and prepared to reunite with her body while Lucas maintained vigil at her bedside created convergence of supernatural rescue and human devotion that demonstrated how different forms of love could combine to achieve impossible objectives. Their partnership across dimensional boundaries, proving that authentic connection transcended physical limitations to encompass spiritual bonds that death itself could not permanently destroy when sustained through memory and commitment. The music that filled the air as Max fought to complete her return journey carried emotional resonance that connected her current struggle to previous victory over Vecna's psychological control. Running up that hill, serving as soundtrack for triumph that required her to climb metaphorical mountain of trauma and despair to reach summit, where freedom waited for those courageous enough to continue fighting when surrender seemed like merciful alternative to ongoing struggle against impossible odds. Lucas's protection of Max's physical form while her consciousness battled for freedom in psychological realm demonstrated how material and spiritual aspects of existence required different but equally important forms of care. His presence at her bedside, providing earthly anchor that complemented her supernatural resistance to forces that sought to separate soul from flesh permanently. His vigil representing faith that love could overcome any obstacle when sustained through patience and unwavering commitment to another person's well-being. The hospital staff's confusion during supernatural crisis reflected broader community's lack of preparation for conflicts that existed beyond conventional understanding. Their attempts to maintain normal medical procedures, while Demogorgons stalked corridors demonstrating how institutional responses often proved inadequate when facing challenges that required flexibility and courage rather than adherence to protocols designed for ordinary emergencies that followed predictable patterns. The resolution of the hospital crisis through successful coordination between supernatural abilities and human determination provided model for understanding how victory against impossible odds required combination of extraordinary gifts and ordinary virtues. The triumph of love over predatory hunger, demonstrating that evil could be defeated not through superior firepower, but through willingness to risk everything for sake of protecting innocence and beauty that gave meaning to existence beyond simple survival or material success. The glitching monster that Henry Creel had become through decades of supernatural corruption revealed his desperate struggle to maintain human form when confronted by someone whose innocence exposed the artificial nature of his carefully constructed disguises. His inability to present convincing Mr. Waters' persona to Holly Wheeler, demonstrating how truth possessed power to disrupt deception, even when spoken by voices too young to understand the full implications of their knowledge. His flickering between identities, creating visual representation of psychological battle between remnants of humanity and cosmic evil that had consumed his soul through voluntary surrender to forces that promised power while delivering only isolation and endless hunger. Henry's loss of humanity had occurred gradually through choices that seemed reasonable at each individual moment, but that collectively led him away from connection and empathy toward detachment that transformed natural sensitivity into weapon against everything he had once loved. His evolution from artistic child who drew pictures of spiders into monster who trapped victims in psychological webs, reflecting corruption that began with legitimate grievances about injustice and cruelty, but that had been twisted through supernatural influence into justification for perpetrating greater harm than he had ever personally experienced. The cave that had once represented his deepest fear as Henry Creel, the place where his father had hidden evidence of war crimes and where darkness seemed to pool with greater density than anywhere else in their family's cursed history, became accessible to his Vecna form only when his connection to human vulnerability had been sufficiently severed through years of choosing power over compassion, revenge over forgiveness, isolation over the messy complications of authentic relationship that required compromise and mutual understanding. His return to spaces that had terrified him during his childhood represented not courage or growth, but rather loss of the protective fear that had once served as barrier against complete surrender to malevolent forces. His ability to enter the cave as Vecna demonstrating how thoroughly he had abandoned the human instincts that might have saved him from transformation into instrument of cosmic destruction. His presence in previously forbidden territory, marking completion of journey from victim to perpetrator, that supernatural corruption had orchestrated through patient manipulation of legitimate anger and justified resentment. Holly's knowledge of his true identity became weapon that could penetrate defenses he had constructed through decades of practice at deception and manipulation. Her simple honesty about recognizing him despite his attempts at disguise, creating vulnerability in someone whose power depended upon ability to control others' perceptions of reality. Her childish directness, proving more effective against his psychological armor than sophisticated analysis or adult skepticism that might have been defeated through arguments that appealed to reason rather than intuition. The glitching effect that accompanied Vecna's attempts to maintain Mr. Waters' appearance while Holly's knowledge pressed against his deception created visual representation of cognitive dissonance that occurred when artificial constructs encountered authentic truth. His struggle to appear harmless and trustworthy, while actually being source of greatest danger in her young life, demonstrating internal conflict between strategic necessity and fundamental nature that could no longer be completely suppressed even through supernatural willpower. His failed attempts to reclaim Holly through manipulation that had successfully ensnared previous victims revealed how innocence could sometimes provide protection that experience and wisdom could not match, her lack of exposure to sophisticated psychological tactics creating advantages that more worldly individuals might have lacked, her natural trust in her own perceptions, serving as shield against gaslighting techniques that required doubt and self-questioning to achieve their corrosive effects on victim psychology. The Wheeler house that served as battleground for their final confrontation carried symbolic weight as representation of domestic safety and family love that supernatural forces sought to corrupt or destroy. The familiar rooms where Holly had played and learned and grown, representing everything that Vecna's nihilistic philosophy rejected about human existence. His presence in spaces dedicated to nurturing childhood development, creating contamination that threatened to transform sanctuary into source of trauma that could poison her relationship with home and security. The stairs where Vecna's glitching form pursued Holly created literal representation of boundary between innocence and corruption. His inability to cross that threshold while maintaining convincing disguise, suggesting that some forms of purity could not be violated without revealing true nature of forces that sought to destroy them. Her escape, representing preservation of hope in world where darkness seemed to gain strength through each victory over people who deserved protection rather than predation. Holly's escape from Vecna's final attempt to capture her demonstrated that heroism could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people. Her ability to resist his influence, despite being alone and afraid, proving that courage was not dependent upon physical strength or supernatural abilities, but could be found in simple refusal to accept defeat as inevitable outcome when something precious required protection from forces that sought destruction. The psychological pressure that truth could exert against deception became evident in Vecna's struggle to maintain false identity when confronted by someone whose honest perception cut through layers of carefully constructed lies. Holly's inability to be fooled by appearances that might have deceived more sophisticated observers, demonstrating how authenticity could serve as weapon against enemies who depended upon confusion and misdirection to achieve their objectives, rather than direct confrontation with forces of light and love. The symbolic destruction of his last connections to humanity occurred as Vecna abandoned attempts at deception to reveal his true monstrous nature. His willingness to terrorize a small child, representing complete surrender of any remaining moral constraints that might have limited his actions. His transformation from patient predator who manipulated through false kindness into obvious threat that pursued through open menace, marking final stage in corruption that left no possibility for redemption or return to human community. The domestic spaces of the Wheeler house, kitchen where family meals had been shared, living room where children had played games and watched television, bedrooms where peaceful sleep had been protected by parents' love, became contaminated by presence of evil that sought to transform every positive association into source of fear and revulsion. His invasion of private family space, representing violation that extended beyond simple physical trespass to encompass assault on memories and relationships that had provided foundation for healthy development. The failure of his supernatural abilities to overcome child's simple refusal to cooperate with his agenda demonstrated limitations that existed even within cosmic evil when confronted by authentic goodness that could not be corrupted through fear or manipulation. Holly's resistance proving that power derived from love and community possessed qualities that individual strength, however enhanced by supernatural forces, could not reliably defeat when sustained through faith in something larger than personal survival or material advantage. The morning light that began to filter through windows as their confrontation reached climax provided symbolic representation of hope that persisted despite darkness that seemed to dominate immediate circumstances, the dawn that approached, regardless of supernatural crisis, suggesting natural rhythms and cosmic order that existed beyond human conflict, while offering promise that current struggles were temporary phases in larger cycle that moved toward light rather than permanent submission to forces of destruction and despair. Holly's successful resistance to Vecna's psychological manipulation, without adult assistance or supernatural abilities of her own, created precedent for understanding that evil could be defeated through determination that refused to accept defeat as inevitable, her triumph providing evidence that individual courage could influence larger conflicts in ways that seemed disproportionate to resources available, but that reflected mysterious mathematics of moral universe where authentic goodness possessed power beyond rational calculation. The preservation of childhood wonder, despite direct contact with cosmic evil, demonstrated resilience that characterized human spirit at its most essential level. Holly's ability to maintain basic trust and optimism after surviving encounter with force, dedicated to destroying everything beautiful and meaningful, proving that some aspects of personality could not be corrupted through external pressure when supported by love and community that validated rather than questioned their inherent worth and authenticity. The weakening of Vecna's psychological hold over other victims that resulted from Holly's successful escape created ripple effects that extended far beyond her individual situation to encompass broader strategic advantages for forces of light, her personal victory providing tactical intelligence while also demonstrating vulnerability in enemy defenses that could be exploited by adult allies who possessed resources and capabilities that children could not access independently, but whose heroism had created opportunities for collective action. The Wheeler house that had been transformed temporarily into battleground between innocence and corruption gradually returned to its natural character as sanctuary for family love and childhood development. The restoration of domestic peace following supernatural crisis, demonstrating how spaces dedicated to nurturing human growth possessed inherent strength that could resist contamination when defended by people whose commitment to protection transcended personal comfort or safety considerations. The understanding that individual acts of courage could create foundations for larger victories emerged from Holly's successful resistance to forces that had seemed insurmountable, her proof that evil could be defeated through determination and honesty, providing inspiration for adult heroes who faced similar challenges on expanded scale. Her example demonstrating that age and experience were less important than authenticity and refusal to surrender values that gave meaning to existence beyond mere survival or material success. The stage that had been set for final confrontation between human community and supernatural destroyer reflected preparation that combined Holly's intelligence gathering with adult resources and supernatural abilities, her contribution to collective effort, validating her worth as person deserving respect and protection, while also acknowledging practical reality that ultimate victory would require coordination between different types of strength and capability that no single individual could provide, regardless of personal courage or determination. The recognition that evil's apparent invincibility often depended upon victims' isolation and despair suggested strategies that emphasized connection and mutual support as weapons against forces that sought to divide people through fear and manipulation. Holly's success in maintaining hope and identity despite supernatural assault, providing template for resistance that could be adapted to other situations where darkness threatened to overwhelm light through psychological pressure rather than direct physical violence. The meaning of bridge as both connection between separate worlds and pathway between concealed hearts, revealed itself through Will Byers' moment of ultimate vulnerability, when years of careful silence could no longer contain feelings that had grown too powerful for adolescent fear to suppress indefinitely. His confession to Mike Wheeler, representing not merely personal revelation but cosmic shift in understanding about what love could mean when freed from social expectations that demanded conformity over authenticity, his words creating span across chasm that had separated his internal truth from external expression throughout years. When safety had seemed to require invisibility rather than honest acknowledgement of emotions that made him feel simultaneously most human and most alien. Will's confession unfolded with trembling voice that carried weight of every moment when he had wanted to speak but chosen silence instead. His admission of love for Mike emerging through tears that reflected both terror at potential rejection and relief at finally releasing secret that had shaped every interaction between them since childhood friendship had evolved into something deeper and more complex than either boy had possessed. Vocabulary to name or framework to understand within community that celebrated certain forms of affection while rendering others invisible, through systematic refusal to acknowledge their existence or validity. The words themselves, when finally spoken aloud after years of internal rehearsal and revision, seemed insufficient to capture complexity of feeling that encompassed friendship and admiration and desire and protective instinct and spiritual recognition of soulmate connection that transcended categories that adults used to organize human experience into manageable portions. Will's struggle to articulate emotions that existed beyond conventional language, demonstrating how authentic love often required invention of new ways of speaking about relationships that had never been adequately represented in mainstream culture or social institutions. Mike's initial response reflected shock that competed with recognition, his surprise at hearing confirmation of what part of him had always sensed, but never allowed himself to acknowledge, fully battling against relief at finally understanding dynamics that had confused him throughout their evolving relationship, his silence stretching long enough to contain an entire universe of possibility, while Will waited for verdict that would determine whether honesty had been pathway toward connection or mistake that would destroy most important relationship in his life through revelation that could never be taken back or forgotten. The internal struggle that played across Mike's features as he processed Will's confession revealed years of his own suppressed questions about identity and belonging, his careful construction of heterosexual persona through relationship with Eleven competing against authentic attraction that had never been examined closely enough to be named or accepted, his realization that Will's courage in speaking truth had created opportunity for him to explore feelings that social conditioning had taught him to dismiss or redirect toward more acceptable targets that provided safety through conformity. The basement setting where their conversation occurred carried symbolic weight, a space where their friendship had been nurtured through countless hours of imaginative play and collaborative storytelling, the familiar surroundings providing comfort that balanced vulnerability required for emotional honesty, while also representing foundation of shared history that would either support their relationship through transformation or become monument to innocence that could not survive contact with adult complexity about love and desire and social acceptance. The understanding that gradually emerged between them transcended simple romantic confession to encompass recognition of partnership that had sustained them through supernatural crises and ordinary teenage challenges alike. Their acknowledgement that friendship had evolved into something deeper and more essential than conventional categories could contain creating foundation for exploring relationship that honored both individual authenticity and collective strength that had made them formidable team when facing enemies that threatened everything they valued most about their community and connections. The group hug with Jonathan that occurred earlier in the episode had provided visual representation of bonds that united their extended family through choice rather than biology. The physical embrace, symbolizing emotional support that transcended individual relationships to encompass network of care that protected all members through mutual commitment to each other's welfare and recognition that survival often depended upon collective action rather than individual heroism, their unity creating strength that no supernatural force could permanently destroy when sustained through love rather than fear or obligation. Murray's dangerous drive through the military compound toward their entry point into the Upside Down required skills that combined practical knowledge of vehicle operation with strategic understanding of how to navigate hostile territory while protecting passengers whose abilities made them valuable targets for government forces that had never abandoned hope of recapturing 11 for purposes that served institutional power rather than human dignity. His reckless courage, providing transportation that was essential for their mission, while also demonstrating how ordinary people could contribute extraordinary service when circumstances demanded sacrifice for sake of protecting innocent lives. The military personnel who attempted to prevent their passage represented institutional resistance to supernatural solutions that challenged conventional approaches to national security, their gunfire and tactical responses, reflecting training that had prepared them for conventional warfare. But that proved inadequate when facing teenagers whose supernatural abilities and moral courage combined to create force that could not be defeated through superior firepower or strategic positioning. Their failure demonstrating limitations of approaches that prioritized control over cooperation. Nancy Wheeler's sharpshooting skills during the van chase provided crucial protection for their mission, while also representing her evolution from suburban teenager, concerned primarily with academic achievement and social acceptance, into warrior whose marksmanship could determine outcome of conflicts that extended far beyond personal concerns to encompass survival of community and possibly entire world. Her accurate fire under extreme pressure, demonstrating competence that had been developed through crisis, but that reflected character strengths that had always existed beneath conventional surface. The resolution of government interference in their supernatural mission occurred through combination of Nancy's tactical effectiveness and their collective determination to protect 11 from institutional forces that sought to exploit her abilities rather than supporting her welfare. Their success in neutralizing military threat, creating clear pathway for focusing attention on cosmic enemy that posed greater danger than human bureaucracy. Their victory over conventional opposition, allowing them to address supernatural challenges that required different forms of courage and capability. Robin's humor during their escape from military pursuit provided emotional release that balanced tension created by life-threatening circumstances. Her ability to find levity in dangerous situations, reflecting resilience that had been developed through previous supernatural crises, while also demonstrating how different personality types could contribute essential elements to group dynamics. Her jokes and observations creating psychological space where fear could be acknowledged without being allowed to paralyze decision-making or cooperative action that their survival required. The scene between Mike and 11 that occurred near the end of the episode represented mature acknowledgement that their relationship had evolved beyond romantic attachment into something more complex and potentially more durable. their conversation demonstrating emotional intelligence that had developed through shared trauma and individual growth that had occurred during months of separation. Their mutual recognition that love could take multiple forms, creating foundation for future connection that honored both their history and their authentic feelings. Eleven's observation about their situation not being like one of Mike's Dungeons & Dragons campaigns reflected her growing understanding of difference between fantasy scenarios, where heroes always triumphed through clever strategy, and supernatural adventures where victory required sacrifice and loss that game rules could never adequately represent. Her comment demonstrating wisdom that had emerged through direct experience with forces that exceeded imagination, while also acknowledging Mike's leadership abilities that had guided them through previous crises. The gesture of 11 cupping Mike's cheek during their conversation carried tenderness that transcended romantic categories to encompass deep affection between people whose shared experiences had created bond that would endure, regardless of whether their relationship continued in romantic direction. Her touch, providing comfort, while also serving as farewell to expectations that had guided their connection throughout previous years, but that no longer fit reality of who they had become through individual growth and changing circumstances. The bittersweet quality that characterized their final romantic conversation reflected mature understanding that love sometimes required letting go of possessive attachment in favor of supporting each other's authentic happiness, even when such support meant accepting that their paths might lead in different directions. Their ability to discuss relationship changes without anger or recrimination, demonstrating emotional development that crisis situations had accelerated, but that also reflected fundamental decency that had always characterized their treatment of each other. The parallel to Steve and Nancy's Season 2 conversation, when he had encouraged her to pursue relationship with Jonathan despite his own feelings, created thematic connection that suggested patterns of mature love that prioritized other person's welfare over personal desire for exclusive possession, the similarity demonstrating how genuine affection could inspire generosity that transcended selfish interest to encompass recognition that authentic happiness required freedom to choose relationships based on authentic compatibility, rather than social expectations or convenient proximity. Mike's realization that he needed to be with Will represented integration of suppressed authentic desires, with conscious acknowledgement of feelings that had existed beneath surface of awareness throughout their friendship. His understanding that Eleven's release of romantic expectations had created permission to explore relationship that might fulfill needs that heterosexual performance had never adequately addressed. His gratitude for her generosity, providing foundation for friendship that could survive transformation of romantic connection. The conversation between Mike and Will that followed Eleven's blessing occurred in private space, where social performance could be abandoned in favor of honest communication about feelings that had shaped their relationship since childhood, but that had never been directly acknowledged or explored. Their ability to speak openly about attraction and love, creating intimacy that transcended physical expression to encompass spiritual recognition of partnership that had always existed beneath conventional friendship categories. Will's tears of joy when Mike reciprocated his feelings reflected years of suppressed hope, finally finding validation through someone whose opinion mattered more than social acceptance or family approval. His emotional release demonstrating how much courage his confession had required, and how significant Mike's positive response was. For someone whose self-worth had been shaped by feeling different and potentially unlovable, his happiness, providing evidence that authentic love could overcome fear when met with understanding rather than rejection. Mike's own emotional response to acknowledging his authentic feelings revealed relief at finally understanding internal confusion that had characterized his attempts at heterosexual romance. His recognition that attraction to Will felt more natural and sustainable than performed affection for Eleven, providing clarity about identity questions that had troubled him throughout adolescence. His acceptance of his sexuality, creating foundation for personal growth that had been impossible while maintaining false persona designed to meet external expectations. The understanding that gradually emerged between them about their relationship encompassed recognition that their bond had always transcended conventional friendship categories, while also acknowledging that romantic dimension had remained hidden due to social pressures and personal fears rather than absence of mutual attraction. Their ability to name and claim authentic connection, creating security that would sustain them through future challenges that required both individual courage and collective strength. Steve and Dustin's friendship restoration occurred through shared acknowledgement of how trauma and misunderstanding had created distance between them that neither had wanted but that both had been too proud or hurt to address directly. Their reconciliation demonstrating how crisis situations could provide opportunities for honest communication that normal circumstances often fail to create. Their renewed bond, reflecting growth that honored their history, while also adapting to changes that time and experience had created in both their personalities and circumstances. The "I die, you die" moment between Steve and Dustin represented ultimate expression of loyalty that transcended casual friendship to encompass brotherhood that would endure regardless of external circumstances or changing social dynamics. Their mutual commitment to each other's welfare, creating security that had been missing during recent period of estrangement. Their reconnection, providing emotional anchor that would support both of them through challenges that individual strength alone could not adequately address. The preparation for final battle that began as emotional connections were restored and clarified, reflected understanding that personal relationships provided foundation for collective action against forces that sought to destroy everything meaningful about human community, their individual healing, creating strength that could be directed toward defeating enemy that threatened not only their physical survival, but also their capacity for love and connection that gave life meaning beyond mere biological existence. Robin's courage in protecting Vicky during the supernatural crisis that descended upon Hawkins General Hospital revealed depths of devotion that transcended casual teenage romance to encompass willingness to risk everything for someone whose safety had become more important than personal survival. Her desperate attempts to reach Vicky's side, despite institutional barriers and physical dangers, demonstrating how authentic love could inspire heroic action that exceeded what training or preparation could provide when facing barriers, enemies that existed beyond normal human understanding or conventional defensive strategies. The transformation of Robin from cautious band student who had once hidden behind sarcasm and intellectual superiority into fierce protector willing to confront demogorgons and security guards with equal determination reflected character development that had occurred through exposure to supernatural crisis and deepening relationship with someone whose worth justified any sacrifice. Her evolution demonstrating how love could unlock courage that remained dormant until circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people who discovered strength they had never known they possessed. Vicky's introduction to the supernatural truth of Hawkins occurred under circumstances that provided no gentle preparation or gradual revelation, but instead threw her immediately into life-threatening situation where denial was impossible and adaptation was essential for survival. her intelligence and natural resilience, enabling rapid adjustment to reality that contradicted everything her previous experience had taught her about how the world functioned. Her ability to remain functional despite terror and confusion, demonstrating character strength that had attracted Robin's attention and affection. The questions that Vicky asked while they sought safety from creatures that should not have existed according to any rational understanding of biology or physics reflected natural human need to comprehend threats and understand context for danger. Her rapid-fire inquiries about Robin's apparent foreknowledge and preparation, revealing both intellectual curiosity and emotional hurt that came from realizing someone she cared about had been concealing important information that affected their shared safety and future planning. Robin's explanations during their concealment from supernatural predators required her to compress months of extraordinary experience into abbreviated account that could provide necessary context without overwhelming someone whose worldview was being fundamentally challenged. Her attempts to maintain focus on immediate survival, while also addressing relationship concerns that Vicky's questions revealed, demonstrating how crisis situations demanded simultaneous attention to practical and emotional needs that competed for limited mental resources. The hospital staff's confusion during the Demodog attack reflected broader community's complete lack of preparation for threats that existed outside conventional emergency protocols. Their attempts to maintain normal medical procedures while supernatural predators stalked corridors, creating chaos that revealed how institutional responses often proved inadequate when facing challenges that required flexibility and improvisation, rather than adherence to established procedures designed for predictable crises that followed familiar patterns. Mike's growing understanding of different kinds of love through observation of Robin and Vicky's relationship provided crucial education about diversity of human affection and attraction that his suburban upbringing had never acknowledged or celebrated. His witness to their authentic connection, creating template for recognizing that his own feelings for Will represented legitimate form of romantic attachment rather than confusion or temporary phase that would be outgrown through proper heterosexual socialization. Robin's role as inadvertent queer mentor for Mike's journey of self-discovery occurred through her simple authenticity rather than deliberate instruction. Her willingness to be genuinely herself in crisis situations, providing representation that demonstrated how same-sex attraction could coexist with heroism and community service, and all other qualities that defined admirable people. Her example, proving that sexual identity was aspect of personality rather than defining characteristic that determined worth or capability. The parallel between Lucas and Max's devotion and Robin and Vicky's developing relationship created thematic connections that transcended gender combinations to emphasize universal qualities of love that included protectiveness and loyalty and willingness to sacrifice comfort for another person's welfare. Their shared experiences of fighting supernatural forces while maintaining romantic connections, demonstrating how authentic relationships could provide strength rather than distraction during crisis situations that tested every aspect of human resilience. Lucas and Max's love transcending dimensional barriers through his vigil at her bedside, while her consciousness battled for freedom in psychological realm, represented triumph of connection over separation that supernatural forces had attempted to impose through their manipulation of reality's fundamental structure, his physical presence providing anchor that complemented her spiritual resistance to forces that sought to divide soul from body permanently. their partnership demonstrating how different aspects of existence require different but equally important forms of care and protection. Steve and Dustin's friendship, healing through mutual support during traumatic encounters with creatures that triggered memories of Eddie's sacrifice, created opportunity for honest communication about grief and guilt that had created distance between them. Their ability to acknowledge pain while also affirming continued affection, demonstrating emotional maturity that had developed through shared experience with loss and recovery. Their reconciliation, providing foundation for future collaboration that honored past friendship while adapting to changed circumstances. The "I die, you die" moment that Steve shared with Dustin represented ultimate expression of loyalty that echoed Dustin's earlier promise, while also demonstrating how their relationship had evolved from mentorship into genuine brotherhood, based on mutual respect and affection. Their commitment to each other's welfare, creating security that transcended family relationships or romantic attachments to encompass chosen bonds that could sustain them through challenges that biological connections might not adequately address. Community bonds growing stronger through shared adversity became evident in the ways that different pairs and groups supported each other during hospital crisis. Their collective response to supernatural threat, demonstrating how external danger could catalyze internal solidarity that might not have emerged under normal circumstances. Their unity creating strength that exceeded some of individual capabilities when coordinated through mutual trust and common commitment to protecting everything they valued about their relationships and community. The hospital's transformation from place of healing into battleground against supernatural predators provided stark contrast that highlighted how quickly familiar environments could become dangerous when forces beyond human control intervened in normal institutional functioning, the medical equipment, and professional spaces that should have provided comfort and security. Instead, serving as hiding places and defensive positions during conflict that required different forms of courage than patients and staff had ever needed to develop. Vicky's adaptation to supernatural crisis, while processing revelation about Robin's feelings and hidden knowledge, demonstrated remarkable resilience that combined intellectual flexibility with emotional stability. Her ability to maintain functional decision-making despite multiple simultaneous challenges, proving that ordinary people possessed reserves of strength that remained untapped until circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from individuals who had never been tested under conditions where conventional wisdom provided inadequate guidance for survival. The security guards whose protocols prevented Robin from reaching Vicky during the attack represented institutional inflexibility that could become additional source of danger during emergencies that required human judgment rather than bureaucratic adherence to rules designed for normal circumstances. Their enforcement of visiting restrictions that ignored emotional bonds and authentic relationships, demonstrating how systems designed to maintain order could create additional suffering when applied without consideration for individual circumstances or genuine needs. Robin's visible frustration with barriers that prevented her from providing direct protection to someone she loved created powerful image of how social conventions and institutional rules could become obstacles to authentic care during crisis situations. Her struggle against separation that served no practical purpose, while creating emotional distress, highlighting costs of systems that prioritized administrative convenience over human connection and mutual support that crisis situations often required for optimal outcomes. The basement level of the hospital where Lucas, Max, Robin, and Vicky eventually found temporary safety provided underground sanctuary that also served as metaphor for hidden spaces where authentic relationships could be acknowledged and celebrated without external judgment or interference. Their physical descent into hospital's foundation, paralleling emotional movement toward deeper honesty about feelings and commitments that surface interactions had not been able to accommodate or support. The radio that Lucas carried throughout their escape attempts represented connection to musical salvation that had previously freed Max from Vecna's psychological control. His understanding that running up that hill held special significance for her recovery, demonstrating intimate knowledge that came from patient attention to details that might seem insignificant to casual observers, but that revealed depth of care and commitment that characterized genuine love rather than superficial attraction. The coordination between physical protection of Max's body and spiritual battle for her consciousness created complex tactical situation that required simultaneous attention to multiple dimensions of conflict. Their success in maintaining her safety while she fought psychological war against forces that sought to claim her, permanently demonstrating how collective effort could address challenges that individual action could never adequately meet, regardless of personal courage or determination. The triumph over supernatural predators through combination of human ingenuity and authentic emotional connection provided template for understanding how victory against impossible odds required synthesis of practical skills and genuine relationships. Their success demonstrating that evil could be defeated, not through superior firepower or strategic positioning, but through willingness to risk everything for sake of protecting people whose welfare had become more important than personal safety or social acceptance. Robin and Vicky's relationship, strengthening through shared danger, created foundation for future connection that had been tested under extreme conditions and proven capable of sustaining them through challenges that casual romance could never survive. Their mutual support during crisis, demonstrating compatibility that transcended surface attraction to encompass deeper recognition of character and values that could provide basis for lasting partnership that honored both individual authenticity and collective strength. The understanding that emerged among all the young couples about different forms of love and commitment created community wisdom that transcended individual relationships to encompass broader recognition that authentic connection could take multiple forms while maintaining essential qualities of care and loyalty and willingness to sacrifice comfort for another person's welfare. Their diverse examples of devotion providing models that could inspire and guide others whose own relationships faced challenges that required courage and creativity to resolve successfully. The government's continued pursuit of Eleven, despite overwhelming evidence that her abilities represented humanity's best hope for defeating cosmic threats that conventional military approaches could never adequately address, reflected institutional blindness that prioritized bureaucratic control over practical solutions to existential dangers. Their relentless attempts to recapture someone whose cooperation they had forfeited through years of systematic abuse, demonstrating how power structures often destroyed their own effectiveness through rigid adherence to policies that served organizational interests rather than genuine national security or human welfare. Nancy Wheeler's evolution into formidable warrior whose marksmanship skills could determine outcomes of conflicts that extended far beyond personal concerns, represented transformation that had occurred through repeated exposure to situations where conventional feminine roles proved inadequate for protecting people she loved. Her deadly accuracy with firearms reflecting training that combined natural talent with determined practice, her willingness to use lethal force when necessary, demonstrating moral clarity that distinguished between violence for its own sake and violence in service of protecting innocence from predatory evil. The van chase through the military compound created high-speed pursuit sequence, where survival depended upon coordination between Murray's reckless driving skills and Nancy's precise shooting abilities, their unlikely partnership combining his knowledge of institutional weakness with her tactical effectiveness to create a formidable team that could navigate hostile territory while protecting passengers whose supernatural abilities made them valuable targets for government forces that had never learnt to distinguish between strategic assets and human beings deserving basic dignity. Nancy's sharpshooting from moving vehicle while under enemy fire required forms of concentration and skill that suburban upbringing had never been designed to develop. Her ability to maintain accuracy, despite physical discomfort and psychological pressure, demonstrating capabilities that crisis situations had revealed and refined through repeated practice, under conditions where failure meant death, capture for people whose welfare had become more important than her own comfort or safety. The military personnel who attempted to prevent their passage represented institutional commitment to capturing 11 that transcended rational assessment of costs and benefits, involved in pursuing someone whose cooperation could never be compelled through force or intimidation. Their tactical response, reflecting training that emphasized control over collaboration, while failing to recognize that supernatural conflicts required different approaches than conventional warfare could provide through superior equipment or strategic positioning. Protection of their found family through coordinated defensive action created visual representation of how individual skills could combine to achieve objectives that no single person could accomplish independently. Nancy's marksmanship providing cover while Murray's driving created mobility and other passengers contributed supernatural abilities that complemented conventional tactics, their success demonstrating power of collective action when guided by shared commitment to each other's welfare rather than institutional loyalty or personal advancement. The resolution of Dr. Brenner's legacy of harm occurred through their successful escape from government forces that sought to continue his work of transforming children into weapons through systematic abuse disguised as scientific research, their victory over institutional evil, providing closure for victims whose suffering had been ignored or rationalized by people who measured human worth in terms of strategic utility rather than inherent dignity, deserving protection, regardless of supernatural capabilities or potential military applications. Murray's reckless but effective driving skills during their escape from military pursuit combined practical knowledge of vehicle operation with strategic understanding of how to outmaneuver opponents whose training had prepared them for conventional scenarios, but who proved inadequate when facing opponents whose motivation transcended professional duty to encompass personal devotion to protecting innocent people from institutional predators who disguised cruelty as patriotic service. The military compound that served as obstacle to their entry into the Upside Down represented final barrier between them and supernatural conflict that would determine fate of their community and possibly entire world. Their successful penetration of government defenses, clearing pathway for focusing attention on cosmic enemy that posed greater threat than human bureaucracy. Their triumph over conventional opposition, demonstrating that authentic courage could overcome superior resources when guided by moral clarity rather than institutional authority. Nancy's ammunition management during extended firefight, while protecting multiple passengers, demonstrated tactical awareness that combined practical understanding of weapon limitations with strategic assessment of threats that required immediate response versus those that could be avoided. Through evasive action, her conservation of resources, while maintaining defensive effectiveness, reflecting military thinking that had been developed through crisis rather than formal training, but that proved adequate for challenges that exceeded conventional preparation. The guards who fell before Nancy's accurate fire represented institutional resistance to supernatural solutions that challenged conventional approaches to national security, their defeat clearing obstacles to mission that required cooperation rather than conquest, collaboration rather than control, their elimination providing tactical advantage while also serving symbolic function as victory of human values over bureaucratic machinery that treated people as resources to be exploited rather than individuals deserving protection and respect. The van that served as their vehicle for penetrating military defenses and accessing upside-down entry point represented Mobile Command Center, where different capabilities could be coordinated effectively, its cramped interior forcing physical proximity that enhanced communication, while also creating vulnerability that required constant vigilance and mutual protection. The vehicle's dual function as transportation and fortress, demonstrating how ordinary objects could be repurposed for extraordinary missions when circumstances demanded creative solutions. Murray's knowledge of institutional weakness and security protocols that he had acquired through years of investigative journalism provided crucial intelligence that enabled their successful penetration of military compound. His understanding of how bureaucratic systems functioned revealing vulnerabilities that could be exploited by people whose motivation exceeded professional obligation to encompass personal commitment to protecting innocent lives from government agencies that had lost sight of their original purpose. The coordination between Nancy's offensive capabilities and other passengers' defensive responsibilities created a tactical system where individual strengths could be maximized while weaknesses were compensated through collective action. Their success demonstrating principles of effective teamwork that transcended military training to encompass natural cooperation that emerged when people shared common goals and mutual trust rather than hierarchical command structures that might inhibit rapid response to changing circumstances. Robin's humor during their escape from government pursuit provided psychological relief that balanced tension created by life-threatening circumstances while also maintaining group morale that could have deteriorated under pressure of sustained combat. Her ability to find levity in dangerous situations, reflecting personality traits that contributed essential elements to team dynamics by creating emotional space where fear could be acknowledged without being allowed to paralyze decision-making or cooperative action. The easy part reference that Robin made while under fire demonstrated her capacity for ironic observation that could provide perspective on their situation without minimizing genuine dangers they faced. Her comment creating moment of shared understanding about how their definition of easy had evolved through repeated exposure to supernatural crisis that made conventional threats seem manageable by comparison. Her wit serving both entertainment and tactical purposes by maintaining mental clarity under pressure. Lucas's response affirming that their current situation was indeed the easy part, compared to supernatural challenges they regularly faced, provided confirmation of how their experiences had fundamentally altered their understanding of danger and difficulty. His matter-of-fact acceptance of gunfire and military pursuit as routine obstacles demonstrating psychological adaptation that enabled them to function effectively during crisis, while maintaining emotional equilibrium that less experienced individuals might not have been able to sustain. The military threat finally being neutralized through Nancy's marksmanship and their collective tactical effectiveness created clear pathway for focusing attention on supernatural enemy that posed existential threat to their community and possibly entire world. Their victory over conventional opposition, allowing them to direct resources and attention toward cosmic conflict that would require different forms of courage and capability than government resistance had demanded from their coordinated, defensive action. The clearing of obstacles that government interference had created provided symbolic as well as practical victory that demonstrated how institutional authority could be overcome when it served narrow interests rather than genuine security needs. Their success proving that authentic patriotism sometimes required resistance to agencies that had lost sight of their original mission to protect citizens, rather than exploit them for purposes that violated constitutional principles and basic human dignity. Nancy's emergence from Van Chase as proven warrior whose capabilities exceeded anything her previous experience might have suggested possible reflected character development that had occurred through repeated exposure to situations where conventional roles proved inadequate for protecting people she cared about. Her transformation from suburban teenager into effective combatant, demonstrating how crisis could reveal hidden strengths while also creating new capabilities through necessity and determination rather than formal training or preparation. The recognition that military plotline had been resolved through their successful escape and neutralization of government pursuit created understanding that remaining conflicts would focus on supernatural threats that existed at core of their ongoing struggle, their victory over institutional enemies, clearing conceptual as well as tactical space for addressing cosmic evil that sought to destroy everything meaningful about human community through psychological manipulation rather than conventional warfare that could be defeated through superior firepower or strategic positioning. The group's planning for their ultimate confrontation with Vecna required synthesis of supernatural abilities and conventional tactics that could address threats existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions of reality. Their strategic discussions, combining Will's insider knowledge of the hive mind connection with Eleven's psychic capabilities and the practical combat skills that Nancy, Steve, and others had developed through repeated exposure to interdimensional warfare, their collaborative approach to final battle, demonstrating how diverse talents could be coordinated when united by shared commitment to protecting everything they valued about their community and relationships. Will's acceptance of his pivotal role in the coming battle reflected mature understanding that his connection to Vecna, which had once made him victim of supernatural forces, could now serve as weapon against the same enemy that had traumatized him throughout his childhood and adolescence. His willingness to risk psychological contamination for sake of providing tactical advantages to his friends, demonstrating courage that transcended personal safety to encompass recognition that some victories required individuals to face their deepest fears for collective benefit. The psychological preparation that Will underwent to ready himself for deliberate contact with forces that had previously overwhelmed and controlled him involved confronting trauma that most people would spend lifetimes trying to forget. His decision to voluntarily enter psychic territory, where Vecna possessed overwhelming advantages, reflecting love for his friends and community that exceeded normal self-preservation instincts. His sacrifice creating foundation for strategies that could exploit enemy weaknesses, while accepting personal risks that no one else could adequately assess or mitigate. Mike's leadership emerging through personal growth that had occurred during recent supernatural crises revealed capabilities that suburban upbringing and academic achievements had never been designed to develop or test. His strategic thinking, combining analytical intelligence with intuitive understanding of group dynamics and individual psychology, his evolution from protected child into tactical coordinator, demonstrating how authentic relationships could provide motivation for exceeding previous limitations when circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people. The recognition of Mike as natural leader reflected not just his strategic intelligence, but also his capacity for inspiring others through personal example of courage and dedication, his willingness to risk everything for people he cared about, creating trust that enabled effective coordination of complex plans that required participants to perform functions that exceeded their previous experience or training. His influence emerging from authenticity rather than authority, from demonstrated commitment rather than formal appointment to leadership roles. Eleven's understanding that her worth extended beyond her supernatural powers represented crucial psychological development that had occurred through relationships with people who valued her as person rather than asset. Her growing confidence in abilities that included empathy and wisdom and practical intelligence, alongside telekinetic force, providing foundation for approaching final battle as complete human being, rather than living weapon whose only value derived from capacity for destruction or strategic advantage. The recognition that Eleven's most important contributions to their collective effort might include emotional support and tactical insight, rather than raw psychic power, reflected mature understanding of how different forms of strength could be equally valuable during crisis situations. Her evolution from isolated laboratory subject into integral member of chosen family, demonstrating healing that had occurred through love and acceptance, rather than exploitation or manipulation designed to enhance supernatural capabilities. Joyce's maternal wisdom guiding the young heroes involved sharing insights gained through years of protecting children from dangers that extended far beyond normal parental concerns into territory where supernatural threats required forms of vigilance and sacrifice that conventional child rearing had never anticipated. Her experience with navigating institutional resistance and bureaucratic obstruction, providing practical knowledge that complemented their supernatural abilities, while her unconditional love created emotional anchor that sustained them through psychological challenges. The strategic discussions that Joyce participated in reflected her evolution from overwhelmed single mother reacting to crisis into active participant in planning that could determine outcome of cosmic conflict. Her contributions, combining practical wisdom about human nature with intimate knowledge of her children's capabilities and limitations. Her voice in tactical decisions, representing perspective that balanced heroic ambitions with realistic assessment of risks and potential consequences that young people might overlook in their enthusiasm for dramatic solutions. Hopper's protective instincts for his found family created natural role as tactical coordinator who could translate military experience into strategies appropriate for supernatural warfare, his understanding of logistics and resource management, complementing their supernatural abilities, while his hard-won wisdom about cost of heroic action provided sobering counterbalance to youthful optimism that might otherwise lead to unnecessary casualties during operations that required precision rather than simply courage. The cabin setting where much of their planning occurred provided sanctuary where honest conversation could address fears and hopes without external pressure or time constraints that crisis situations typically imposed. The familiar surroundings, creating atmosphere of security that enabled vulnerable admissions about capabilities and limitations that tactical success would require them to acknowledge accurately rather than minimize through false bravado, or optimistic assumptions about what could be accomplished through determination alone. Steve's evolution from popular teenager, concerned primarily with social status, into genuine hero, willing to risk personal safety for community welfare, found expression in his practical contributions to battle planning that combined his natural protectiveness with hard-won combat experience, his transformation demonstrating how crisis situations could reveal authentic character beneath carefully constructed social facades while providing opportunities for growth that normal circumstances might never have catalyzed or supported. The recognition of Steve as reliable team member whose courage had been proven through repeated supernatural encounters created trust that enabled him to assume responsibilities that his previous reputation as superficial popular kid might not have suggested he could handle effectively. His development from social performer into genuine leader, reflecting personal growth that had occurred through relationships with people who valued authenticity over appearance and character over social advantages. Dustin's scientific mind contributing crucial strategies to their battle planning involved applying theoretical knowledge and analytical thinking to problems that existed beyond conventional understanding. His ability to recognize patterns and develop hypotheses about supernatural phenomena, providing intellectual framework that could guide tactical decisions, while his natural curiosity drove him to explore possibilities that others might dismiss as too dangerous or unlikely to succeed through practical implementation. The technological resources that Dustin brought to their planning sessions included both sophisticated equipment and innovative approaches to communication and coordination that could provide advantages during operations where conventional military tactics proved inadequate for addressing enemies that possessed supernatural abilities. His expertise with electronics and engineering, creating practical solutions that enhanced their capabilities, while demonstrating how different forms of intelligence could contribute to collective success. Lucas and Max's love serving as source of strength for entire group reflected how authentic relationships could provide emotional foundation that sustained individuals through challenges that might otherwise prove overwhelming. Their devotion, creating visible example of what they were fighting to protect, while also demonstrating resilience that inspired others to continue struggling against odds that rational analysis might suggest were insurmountable through conventional approaches. The understanding that personal relationships provided motivation that transcended individual survival to encompass collective welfare created psychological resources that could sustain them through battles that required forms of sacrifice that isolated individuals might not possess sufficient reason to attempt. Their bonds creating network of mutual support that enhanced individual capabilities, while also providing reasons for continuing struggle when purely personal considerations might counsel retreat or surrender. The interweaving of all their individual journeys toward common purpose created narrative that connected personal growth with cosmic conflict, their diverse backgrounds and experiences contributing different perspectives and capabilities that combined to create force capable of confronting enemy whose power had seemed absolute when faced by individuals acting alone. Their unity demonstrating how authentic community could provide strength that exceeded some of individual contributions when guided by shared values and mutual commitment. The tactical plans that emerged from their discussions reflected synthesis of supernatural abilities and conventional wisdom that could address challenges existing simultaneously on multiple levels of reality. Their strategies, acknowledging that victory would require coordination between physical and psychological battlefronts, while maintaining flexibility that could adapt to changing circumstances as operations progressed and new information became available about enemy capabilities and defensive positions. The emotional preparation that accompanied tactical planning involved honest assessment of potential losses and recognition that heroic action often required accepting costs that could not be precisely calculated in advance. Their mature acknowledgement of risks, creating psychological foundation for making decisions that prioritized collective welfare over individual safety, while maintaining hope that careful planning and courageous execution could minimize casualties among people whose survival had become essential for community recovery. The understanding that their final confrontation with Vecna would determine not just immediate survival but long-term possibility of normal life. Returning to their community created stakes that justified extraordinary risks while also emphasizing importance of success that could not be achieved through partial victory or temporary containment of threats that would continue endangering innocent people until permanently resolved through decisive action that eliminated rather than simply controlled cosmic evil. The recognition that they possessed both individual strengths and collective capability necessary for victory against enemy whose power had previously seemed absolute provided confidence that balanced realistic assessment of dangers with justified hope that careful preparation and courageous action could achieve objectives that isolation and despair had made seem impossible, their unity creating foundation for approaching final battle with determination rather than desperation, guiding their tactical decisions and personal choices. And so we rest here at the threshold between speculation and revelation, our hearts full of hope for the characters who have become as real as our own dreams. In these gentle predictions, we see reflections of our deepest wishes, that love conquers fear, that friendship transcends all boundaries, that even the darkest monsters cannot destroy the light that lives within brave hearts. Whether Will finds the courage to speak his truth, whether Mike discovers the freedom to be authentic, whether Max and Lucas reunite in triumph, whether Robin and Vicky build something beautiful together, these possibilities comfort us, like favorite lullabies. The basement where it all began, the hospital where healing waits, the upside down where nightmares dwell, and the hearts where love grows stronger than any darkness. All these places hold space for the endings we pray will come. Rest now in the knowledge that the best stories are the ones where broken people find wholeness through each other, where the monsters we face are conquered not by power alone but by the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love. Sweet dreams from Hawkins, where every prediction is really just a wish whispered in the dark.